Brothers and sisters, excellencies, Dr. Rajkumar, Naveen Jindalji, Shashi Tharoor, my friend Sreeram, and our publisher. I thank Sreeram for inviting me for this occasion, because I have been closely associated while Sreeram was working in Sri Lanka and in Philippines. I am no more part of the Nonviolent Peace Force anymore for quite some time. But yes, I had a close relationship with it. I was one of the founders and directors also of the Nonviolent Peace Force and had the privilege of looking into the affairs of Sri Lankan involvement and Philippines. So I was very happy when I heard that Sreeram has already finished his book and this is going to be launched. He is a prolific writer, intellectual, and as a peacemaker in Sri Lanka and Philippines, he really did some of the most outstanding projects there. And his role was very important. I remember it was a very interesting team. Sreeram from India and Atif Hamid from Pakistan. These two really gelled so well. And in Sri Lanka, some of the most daring peacekeeping operations were conducted by these two of them, confronting LTTE, Supremo of the region, where nobody would dare to go. But these people did dare to go and seek the release of children. So they were really a wonderful team. And out of this, so it is not only his intellectual work, but his practical involvement in resolving the issues, practical involvement in violence. That is what makes his work more important. And I think any book or any discourse is more important when it raises questions or when it inspires some questions in you. And therefore, this has been in my mind for a long time. My own experience, little experience internationally, not much. I cannot boast of any international experience when there are such an internationally experienced people like Shashi Tharoor and others who have managed huge institutions. But with the study of Mahatma Gandhi and his ideas, his philosophies, and experimenting on ground here and elsewhere on how to make nonviolence more effective, some very profound questions about the third-party intervention, which is the main subject of the international humanitarian organization, to arise. In 1946 and 47, when India was about to be divided, we were in such a mess. Violence was at its peak. At the time when negotiations were going on for transfer of power with Mountbatten, Mahatma Gandhi very bluntly told him, when Mountbatten was advocating, was suggesting that their troops should live here for some more longer time, because without the intervention of the British troops and British administration that it was here, and his own, maybe one of the communities, both the communities, Hindus and Muslims who were killing each other, the violence would not be contained. Mahatma Gandhi very bluntly said, I don't want you. Please get out. No third-party intervention. If we look into the third-party intervention, the idea of third-party intervention, it's certainly from the humanitarian angle, it is very important. But there is another aspect to it, that when should a third party intervene and what should be the mandate? Because in a conflict resolution, the whole process is such that finally the one who has the power of resolving a conflict is empowered. Not one of the communities in the conflict who are at stake. The communities, the parties who are in conflict, they progressively get disempowered if the third party intervention becomes too predominant to exert such a pressure for resolution that the methods and ways and means of resolutions remain no more in the hands of the parties at stake. Therefore, even in his small text, his manifesto, as he unfurled his epic war, his yuddha, Sreeram asked me to speak on how to prevent war. I said, look, war may not be prevented but transformed. Mahatma Gandhi also waged a war. India waged a war. But that was a war which probably all nations, all people, all those who suffer injustice and indignity should follow those ways and means of war. That was the transcendental way of evolving a new method, and we know that non-violence. But there, what was his purpose? That finally, the power, the empowerment of the individual, empowerment of the community must be the final purpose. And empowerment means what? Because this empowerment term has become one of the major driving force in the international humanitarian work, in the international development work, etc., etc. But what do we empower? That is the main question. And therefore, one of the issues we must also understand is that for humanitarian organization, for people who are seeking civilian protection or even the helping people in distress, whom do they hold as the authority? Whom do they take as absolute? Because among the humanitarian organizations, as we know, NGOs, the people working in the community level, either you take the state as the absolute or you take the people as absolute. Today, there is a lot of talk in India going on. That some people are up in arms because they think that the people are absolute. Then there is another sector, we think that the state is the absolute, the law is the absolute, the law which is mandated by the nation is absolute. Why? The others think that the people are the absolute. Mahatma Gandhi here tells us that neither the people nor the state, truth is absolute. Whether people and state, the legality involved in the third party intervention and the humanitarian spirit that is involved also in the third party intervention in conflict situation, what do we hold as absolute? Truth and justice. Problem arises when, in violent areas, humanitarian agencies get into the issues of justice. And without addressing the issues of justice, the intervention sometimes becomes very puerile, sometimes becomes really, for the people who are involved, it becomes just uninterested. And every human being, whether a person, an Indian or a German or an American involved in Sri Lanka, it is very true that they have nothing to do with the politics of Sri Lanka. They must not get into the politics of Sri Lankan ethnic conflict. But as a human being, we have a voice inside. We have a quest for justice. This is the quest that we are born with. So, one speaks up. And this speaking up often is also part of the mandate of such organization that you must monitor the human rights violations. The monitoring of human rights violation is one of the major mandate of international organization, and Shashi Tharoor would certainly, he has seen all this and he has been in the making of all this, and probably he has been a person to whom many NGOs must have reported human rights violations of the one or the other party in another nation. Now here also there is a problem. I had this problem in Sri Lanka. I faced this problem, and my organization, when I was with Nonviolent Peace Force, when Sreeram was working there, that I did face the problem. When international organizations get into human rights monitoring, yes, that is very important, because one must stand by the one who suffers violence and indignity. But then, whom would you report? The misdeed of the one or the other? Would you report as an international to the one who is the perpetrator, one who is the sufferer, or the one who is neither the sufferer, neither the perpetrator, but the one who has a superpower, a UN agency or an embassy of a Western country or some international agency who wields power to sanction, to impose sanctions on the host country, the country which suffers violence from the woods? Whom would you report? We had this running debate in such organization that whom should we report? Because there are two ways. One is because human rights regime, that is a legal way. Legality is that there is a stick, there is a gun behind it, there is a power behind it, power of violence behind it. If we approach it through non-violence, how would we approach it? Because if we approach it through human right angle, then obviously one would report it to the organizations which are responsible for human rights monitoring at international level, who monitor human rights internationally in conflict zones, and whose mandate is that, UN agencies, etc., etc. What has happened in Sri Lanka, what has happened in other countries by reporting such, by international NGOs working in such conflict zones? Finally, we saw that in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan government, Rajapaksa, was put in the dock. Right? Why should my government, I am a sovereign country, if a third party, international third party, works here, serves my people suffering violence and inhumanity, let them serve. But if they are only helping or also as a part of their job, they are helping the international organization prepare a dossier against my government, against my state, against my people, which will be a punishment, which will be brought to the international court in The Hague under the ethnic cleansing and so on. So there are 4 such major issues on which then internationally the Western countries are seeking the right to intervene, even with their army. Asians and Westerners, we have different viewpoints on things. And I would suppose that we need to evolve an Asian view on international involvement. In Asian countries, if there are conflict, how would we involve in that? I don't mean to say that the Western must not come. Yes, there are good-hearted people, as Shashi has already said. Good-hearted people should have it. But can we deny, Shashi, that there is no politics of that? Is it not the fact that the human right is a weapon in the armor of the American foreign policy? Is it not a fact?
But not exclusively.
But what has happened? What is our experience in most of the third world countries, in the Asian countries? This is our experience. Our experience says something. But at the same time, yes, I would say then, if human right is important, why no international organization, no Western agency has gone to Tibet? Why? We find soft spots. Here the power game certainly is involved, because China is there and we do not like to speak against China. So therefore, I say that there is a problematic about human rights regime, about intervening in conflict areas through human rights regime. Therefore, how do we evolve a non-violent point of view, a non-violent strategy for involvement in conflict regions in Asian countries. We may not say about other countries, but at least about Asian countries we should think. Because in non-violence, what would happen? That if you have committed violence on me, then the third party would report it to you, to the perpetrator, and report it to the people, the local people. Because there you must rather appeal to the minds and hearts of the people in the neighborhood, in the same nation. Let them be the accountable. Who is accountable and who is answerable? In Sri Lanka, if LTTE committed violence, then the LTTE people should be addressed. Then the Sinhala should be addressed. Then the Tamilians should be addressed. There should be local accountability and reporting mechanisms. And if such mechanisms are created in these countries, local mechanism of handling their own human rights issues and empowering them, then I think there is a lingering fear that through the use of human rights issues, the Western powers are seeking their way into the internal politics and internal, say, geopolitics of this region. This fear could be allayed. And Sreeram's book certainly raises these issues, and I congratulate him for raising these issues, and having worked in these issues, he is more authentic on that. Thank you so much, all of you.